my channel. If you're new here, I'm so happy you're here. Make sure that you follow and check out the last episodes. I did start a new series where I'm decoding the Bible from Genesis to Revelation and just giving a more esoteric, kind of deeper spiritual understanding of what it means rather than literal. What I've been taught my whole life was to read it literally, and it just makes more sense and resonates with me. So I hope to be able to do the same for those watching. Okay, so we'll just get straight into it because there's a lot to get through. We're going to finish Genesis today and move into Exodus. So finally we made it. So this is the incident concerning Dinah. Okay, so you have Dinah, who's the daughter of Jacob, and you have Shechem, who basically sleeps with Dinah, and his father Hamar, he's like, I'm in love with her. He tells his father Hamar, he's like, go, try to get her to be my wife. Okay, so I want to go over a couple of the names for a second just so you can understand. And the Bible even tells you when the names, and they have the dashes between the names, it's telling you to look it up and understand what the Hebrew original meanings were. So Hamar literally means donkey, burden. This is Shechem's father. Shechem means driven desire, eagerness, right? Eagerness to learn about your spiritual side and to tap into that. Dinah means judgment, discernment, inner law. And it says, and when Shechem, the son of Hamar, the Hivite, which Hivite means on the surface level. Okay, so you can see how all of this starts to make more sense when you can understand the actual names and all that stuff. Okay, so Hamar, Shechem's father, he's like, okay, I'll go basically see what I can do, right? So he goes and tries to talk to Jacob and the sons, and he's like, can my son marry your daughter? And they're basically like, no, right? Because you're not circumcised, right? And circumcision in the Bible, which we went over in the last episode, just means that you're still attached to your earthly egoic desires. Okay, so when you keep going, he literally tells him, he's like, you have to be circumcised and everybody in the house has to be circumcised. So they go and do this, right? They cleanse themselves because you have to remember Shechem is that desire, that eagerness to want to learn about spirituality and have that spiritual awakening. But if you look closely, which is so interesting to me, cattle in the Bible means low earthly desires, right? Low thoughts. And when this is all happening, the brothers are basically like, this isn't going to happen, right? Hamar tries to convince them, the father, and they're like, I don't think so. But Jacob literally even says that his sons are with the cattle, right? Meaning they're with their lower thoughts. So what do when all this happens? They literally kill everybody in the house. They kill Shechem, they kill Hamar, and Jacob's like, what have you done? But the key part that's so interesting to me is how it literally even tells, and he tells them, he's like, build an altar, meaning surrender, transformation, dedicating the mind to the higher. Then he says, put away the strange gods among you and be clean. Okay, most people will be like, oh, this is talking about worshiping astrology and all these things, and it's not. When it's talking about strange gods, it's talking about old desires, attachments, things you give your power to that are not your higher self. And says, then Jacob and the strange gods and all the earrings. Earrings means ears. What you're listening to, your influences, the people around you that are telling you that getting into stuff like this, reading the Bible this way is wrong. It's telling you to put those old thoughts and those, what everybody's telling you, the influence, put it up, get rid of it, take it to the altar and surrender it. Okay, so, and then it says, and Jacob hides them under a tree by Shechem. Under a tree symbolizing rooted spiritual protection, and by Shechem meaning desire that is finally willing to awaken. Okay, so the whole point of this story isn't about violence. It's about Shechem, your desire, awakening to the spiritual life. Dinah being judgment, Shechem, desire to awaken, Hamar, the old earthly nature, the burden, right? Circumcision, removing egoic attachment, strange gods, attachments and habits you've given too much power to, earrings, what you allow into your mind, and Bethel, the house of God within you. It's the inner story of your desire, meeting your higher discernment and going through your purification process. Okay, so after all that with Dinah, Jacob came to Luz, which is the land of Canaan. And remember, Canaan represents the lower mind. the landscape of base consciousness. Luz itself means hard, indestructible kernel, symbolizing the eternal, indestructible part of the soul, the core conscious that survives transformation, the spiritual seed that can't be destroyed. Okay, so Jacob built an altar there, which is surrendering the lower self and all attachments, and he called the place El Bethel, which means house of God, full recognition of God's presence in consciousness. Okay, and then it talks a little bit at the end of that chapter about how Rebecca's nurse died, and she was buried under an oak tree called Alan Buckheath. So Alan equals oak in Hebrew, representing strength and stability. Bakuth equals weeping grief. This part of the story, like the story of Deborah and Alan Bakuth, teaches the true leadership and spiritual action arise from inner wisdom grounded in spirit and strength, and tempered by the acknowledgement of survival through hardship. The oak is like the rooted awareness that protects the spiritual seed while transformation happens. Okay, so when we move on to Genesis 35:9, God appeared unto Jacob again, where he came out of Padan Aram and blessed him. When we break these words down, Padan equals open field, Aram equals Armenian region, together representing the stage of inner preparation and spiritual testing. Jacob must travel there before he receives his soul partner, Rebecca. Symbolically, this is the soul leaving the comfort zone and familiar consciousness to prepare for higher union. God tells Jacob his new name is Israel, meaning he who struggles with God and overcomes, or he who unites with divine consciousness. Okay, so the same thing has to happen in your own life. I went through it. You have to be able and willing to take all of what you know and the old people you don't resonate with anymore and bring it to the altar, surrender it, go through that dark night of the soul phase so that you can come here and start the awakening process. Okay, so that's what we're about to get into. And you'll see that as we go further that quite literally everything is symbolic. And I find it so cool to break the words down. Even as I'm going through this new series of Genesis through Revelation, there's things that I'm seeing that I never have seen before when I've read the stories. And, you know, breaking each word down and name of the cities, it's all meaningful, and they did it so just beautifully, to be honest. So verse 16 says, they journeyed from Bethel, and there was a little way to come to Ephrath. Ephrath equals fruitful, doubling, increase, and the place is also known as Bethlehem. Wrath equals place of abundance, fertile region. Then we have Rachel, Jacob's beloved. Rachel, she equals the female sheep, innocence, gentleness. God promises, fear not, thou shalt have this son to Rachel. Verse 18 tells us Rachel's soul was departing and she died. She called her son Ben-Oni, but Jacob named him Benjamin, renamed him Benjamin. So Ben equals son, Oni equals sorrow, grief, trouble, the seed of spiritual life born from struggle. Benjamin equals son of the right hand, showing the alchemical transformation of the shadow into divine purpose. The grief seed, Ben-Oni, becomes Benjamin, the divine through inner alchemy. You have to have that inner alchemy that happens, right? The same way they turn lead into gold is the same thing that happens through a spiritual awakening, turning that lead into gold, having that inner transformation go on. Jacob, now Israel, spreads his tent beyond the Tower of Edar, symbolizing expanding awareness beyond previous limitations. He dwells in the land, and Reuben goes and lays with Bilhah, Rachel's servant, who becomes the second mother to some of Jacob's children. Bilhah represents the receptive, obedient aspect of the soul, the channel, right, through which spiritual energy and blessings flow when the higher self is not yet fully manifest. Genesis 35:20 through 26, it talks about the 12 sons of Jacob, all born in Pandaram, the place of preparation. Jacob then comes to Isaac, his father, unto Mamre, meaning inner sanctuary, to the city of Arba, which means foundational blocks, emphasizing the building of conscious structure. Verse 28 says, and the days of Isaac were 180, which is 180 years, which we all know a circle is 360 degrees, so this is half of the circle, talking about the transformation halfway through a cycle. This is about generational cycles, breaking old habits and completing transformative processes. Genesis 36:1 introduces Esau, also called Edom, meaning red. Okay, so Edom in Hebrew means red, which represents physical desires, impulses, and immediate gratification. The following verses list his wives and children, each facet of the psyche and lower consciousness. Okay, so if we go to this part, it literally says the family of Esau, right? If you break down every name that they give when they start talking about his sons, like Adah equals decorational attachment to appearances or surface. Aholibama, aspiration toward higher awareness through worldly desire. Hides, outside influences, social pressures. Hivides, attachments to worldly stability. Okay, so then it talks about Esau takes all his wives, sons, daughters, and his cattle. Right here we see that again, cattle, this low earthly desires, this domestic, right, thoughts and all of that, which symbolize lower thoughts, and all his beasts and substances, meaning base instincts and material acquisitions from the lower consciousness, and moves to the country to face Jacob, full of riches, symbolizing the accumulation of worldly experience and lower energies. Verse 7, but he could not dwell because of the cattle. Okay, so you see, it literally tells you, and when you can start understanding this stuff, it makes more sense. Okay, so that wouldn't have made sense to me before, but it literally says, right, he can't dwell because of the cattle, meaning he could not settle spiritually because the lower thoughts were overwhelming, unconsolidated. Esau dwelt in Mount Seir, meaning rugged, untamed consciousness, raw earthly impulses. These verses summarize the generations of Esau, father of Edomites, the unrefined, instinct-driven aspects of the psyche. When we move on to Genesis 36, 10 through 14, the text goes through all the names of Esau's children and families. These are not just genealogies. These are symbolic. This is a symbolic map of the inner spirituality of shadow forces and lower impulses in the psyche. Okay, so the lessons here is you must face your shadow self, the impulses, lower desires, and egoic attachments before higher consciousness can emerge. Verse 31 through 34 show all these people died and were replaced with kings, right? It's so interesting. If you literally read, it's a whole page and a half where it's giving you the names, and like for instance, like and Bela died, and Jobab the son of Zara and Bozrah reigned instead. So and so died, and so reigned instead. So and so died, and so reigned instead. So and so died, and so reigned instead. Following where we just started talking about Esau and his whole family, how they're bringing him over here, right? So now we're killing off these lower thoughts, these lower desires, and they're getting replaced with higher consciousness, higher desires that are more aligned with spirit, divine, right? Okay, so after this, Joseph dreams, and he basically comes to his brother, and he's like, I have a dream, and I want you to listen. So he's like, behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaf stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. Okay, so sheaves, fruits of labor, spiritual work, manifestation of effort. Obeisance is submission, humility. Joseph's sheaf standing upright, his labor, effort, and consciousness rising, demanding recognition from the lower faculties, his brother's sheaves. Okay, so his brother is like, so you shall reign over us, is that what you're saying? and he hated him, right? So in verse 9, Joseph dreams again, and he's like, I have another dream to tell you guys. He's like, behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars made obeisance to me, right? Here we can see where astrology is put in here as well. Okay, so sun equals the celestial source of consciousness, divine self. Moon, emotional mind, intuition. 11 stars, Joseph's brothers, also corresponding to the zodiac energies. Total equals 12, the full will of consciousness, cosmic order. Okay, so his brothers envied him, but Jacob observed the saying. His father was like, I actually want, he's like, that's interesting, right? So his brothers went to feed their father's flocks, and Shechem/desires to awaken were present. Joseph goes to check on them. And Israel asked Joseph, are you feeding the flock? Come, I will send thee unto them. Joseph goes, finds his brothers in Dothan, meaning, so basically he sends them, and he's like, he's like, and his brother went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, which is desires to awaken, right? And he's like, I'll send you to Dothan to go find them. And Dothan means water source, life-giving. Okay, so now we're about to get into where his brothers basically go against him and trick him. The same thing that happened to Jesus, right? When they did the same thing, sold him for 20 pieces of silver in this story, they sold him for 30, or vice versa. We're about to get into it right now, but the same thing over and over you see happening in the Bible. It's because Joseph is the same as Jesus. It's all representative of the Son. So finds his brother in Dothan, meaning 2 wells, abundant water source, life-giving. And when they see him afar off, they conspire to kill him. They say, behold, the dreamer cometh, slay him and cast him into the pit. Same thing that happened to Jesus. This is a mirror to the story of Jesus, betrayal by one's own envy and casting into a pit. Shadow forces arise against higher consciousness. Okay, so Reuben intervenes and he delivers Joseph out of their hands, saying, we don't need to shed any blood, but cast him into the pit, into the wilderness. Joseph is stripped of his coat of many colors. This is what the Bible says. His traits and spiritual gifts, and cast into the pit, which is empty, symbolizing the world of shadow work, testing, and purification. While they're eating, the Ishmaelites from Gilead pass by with camels bearing spices, balm, and all these other things on their way to Egypt. Judas says, what gain is it to kill our brother and conceal his blood? So they sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver, symbolic again of the parallel of what we just talked about with Jesus. Sold for silver, betrayed, and delivered into the hands of the foreign world, Egypt. Reuben later returns, finds the coat, and they dip it in goat's blood, and they're basically about to go and try to trick their dad, and they're like, is this not your son's coat? And he's like, yes. What evil animal killed my son? And he believes it, right? So they tricked the father as well. Okay, so this symbolizes the soul entering the world of learning, and shadow challenges the journey through pain and separation before higher awareness manifests. Okay, so we get into Judah and Tamar. Judah equals leadership, responsible will, conscious authority, though still immature at this stage. Tamar equals divine, feminine, inner desire, hidden wisdom, intuition. The story of deception here shows the process of delayed gratification, testing, and integration of the inner feminine with conscious creative impulse. Spiritual maturity requires responsible engagement with inner creative desire. Okay, so they bring Joseph to Egypt. Joseph is sold to Potiphar, which I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but I hope. If not, my bad. An officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. Symbolically, Egypt equals the world of material mastery and external testing. Joseph is with the Lord, his consciousness remains aligned, and he prospers. Potiphar sees this and makes Joseph overseer of his house. All that he owns is blessed, right? He wants his house to be blessed too, so he's like, yeah, let's make him the ruler of the house. So Potiphar's wife casts her eyes upon Joseph. Temptation arises, symbolic of desires trying to divert spiritual focus. She asks him a million times. She's like, lie with me. And he's like, no. So she's like, lie with me again. And he says no, and he runs off because she grabs him. And she still has a piece of his clothing. And when the men come in, she basically lies to them, right? And she's like, why did you bring this Hebrew in here to mock us, right? That's what they say. So she waits for her husband, and she lies to her husband, accusing Joseph. So they put Joseph in prison, the place of trial, purification, and inner mastery. Okay, so here parallels all esoteric initiation process, betrayal, false accusation, shadow confrontation, and entry into the inner chamber of higher wisdom. At this point, Joseph has been betrayed by brothers, shadow impulses, stripped of his gifts, coat, cast into a pit, shadow world, sold into a foreign land, material and worldly trials, tempted by desire, Potiphar's wife, entrusted with responsibility even in the foreign system. All of this is preparation for the higher self to emerge, teaching the integration of shadow, spiritual labor, leadership, and purity under trial. At this point, Joseph is in the prison. He's stripped of his coat, many colors. The coat of many colors represents the spectrum of consciousness, the totality of your inner faculties, all the chakras aligned, and your gifts of perception and higher awareness. Being stripped of it, that's the soul temporarily hidden from its full expression, placed in shadow state. Okay, while he's there, the chief butler and the chief baker come to him. They say, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. Okay, so Joseph responds, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them me, I pray you. He's pointing out that true understanding doesn't come from the ego or the intellect alone. It comes from divine source, from God, from higher consciousness. Okay, so the chief butler's dream. The chief butler says, "In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters therefore brought forth ripe grapes, and Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. And I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave it into Pharaoh's hand." Joseph interprets the 3 branches symbolize 3 days. He says, "Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will return to serve Pharaoh, putting the cup into his hand." 3 days equals the purification, which I'm going to talk about in a second. The 3 days that the sun dies and comes back on the 25th is where we get Jesus' birthday, winter solstice. And the 3 days we need to be fasting. The vine and grapes is the sacred oil, right? The kundalini that happens when the chakras are activated, and that oil can rise back up. Pharaoh's cup is the vessel of divine principles. So Pharaoh means the sun too. Okay, so what happens is every 28 and a half days, every month, the moon will transit through your sun sign, your zodiac sign. This is just facts. It'll sit there for 2.5, 3 days. And it was born, what happens is it's born from your pituitary and your pineal gland, which is the milk and the honey in the Bible. And it's born in your solar plexus chakra. This is where the sun is, and it needs to be able to go from winter, right? What happens in winter? Everything starts falling off, and basically the death and rebirth phase. And we need to be able to have it rise back up so that we can enter into summer, so that we can enter into Christ consciousness. Okay, so being restored equals the reunion of higher faculties with purpose and authority. Okay, so this story is really about the inner return of clarity and higher awareness. After being in the shadow, the butler represents the receptive aspect of the soul, the part that seeks restoration and alignment with divine cycles. The chief baker's dream. So the baker sees 3 white baskets on his head with birds eating from the topmost basket. Joseph interprets the 3 baskets are 3 days, and in the top basket are the selfish impulses, blocked energy, lower desires. They are removed. You should be hanged, your egoic patterns eliminated, right? So they hang the baker. And this is because I love the way that Bill Donahue described this part. He talks about how the baker, right, you go in and you think you know what you want, and you're not doing anything, making anything yourself, coming up with these divine thoughts. You're just, that needs to be killed off, basically, the baker. So that's why they symbolically hung him. Together, the butler and baker show us the 2 aspects of the lower self, the part that can be restored through alignment, and the part that must be removed because it resists transformation, the baker. Pharaoh also has a dream, and Pharaoh then dreams himself, and they called Joseph up to interpret the dreams as well. There's something flying around here. But Pharaoh then dreams himself. In one dream, 7 fat cows came up out of the river and fed in a meadow, and 7 lean cows came up after them and devoured the fat cows. In another dream, 7 full ears of corn grew, and 7 thin ears came up and swallowed the full ears. Okay, so this is symbolic of the 7 chakras, right? Saying like the thin or the fat, it doesn't matter. We need to have them aligned. We need to basically go into a fasted state, which is talking about for the 3 days, so that these chakras can be opened, so they can start spinning, right? Chakra in Sanskrit means wheel, turning. And when this happens, this is when the oil can rise back up, okay? So the 7 fat cows, 7 years of abundance, aligned chakras, open channels of spiritual energy, productive life force. 7 lean cows, thin ears equals 7 years of famine, depletion, shadow work, contraction, blocked flow. River is the source of life force and consciousness, the subconscious mind. Meadow is the fields of active spiritual work, integration, and preparation. Okay? So 7 years of plenty is time to gather, prepare, conserve energy, and cultivate spiritual resources. 7 years of famine is testing, scarcity, purification, integration of shadow patterns. The cycles of abundance and scarcity correspond to the natural rhythms of consciousness and life. Here they basically have Joseph rule over Egypt. So Pharaoh sends for Joseph, and he is brought hastily from the dungeon. He shaves, changes raiment, and prepares to meet Pharaoh. This is all symbolic of the purification, shedding old identities, aligning with spiritual authority, and receiving the sacred oil, the life force, divine energy. you'll see the number 3 repeated, right? Jesus dying, resurrecting 3 days. In all religions, you'll see the same thing, 3 days. It's because when winter solstice happens, December 22nd, the sun literally dies, right? And it comes back 3 days later. And this is why we have Jesus' birthday on the 25th. We celebrate Christmas and all of these things. Okay, so after Joseph is lifted out of the prison and prepared. Okay, wait, no. So Joseph now oversees Egypt's storehouses of abundance. These are spiritual energies prepared during the years of plenty to survive and integrate the years of famine. After Joseph is lifted out of the prison, he prepared to administer Pharaoh's resources. The story turns to his brothers arriving in Egypt. This is where shadow work really comes alive. Okay, so and move on just so I can keep up and make sure that I'm going along. So when we move into chapter 42, it's basically talking about the shadow work that is about to come. I went through this in my spiritual awakening, and I'm sure there will be more shadow work that has to come. But everybody, when you're truly doing the work and going through those stages, you'll have that period where you have to go through the shadow work. There is no skipping it. It's almost like the universe forces you to face yourself and to go within and to see all these things that you think you are that you really aren't, to face all of the things that you need to heal from and all of those things. It's a very dark time, but much beautiful on the other side, right? It's no different than the seasons. Winter, this is the shadow work. When spring comes, this is the fruits of the labor that we get to reap from doing the shadow work. Okay, so when his brothers arrive, they don't know Joseph is in charge, right? Because you got to remember, they just sold Joseph, and that's all that the last that they saw. Okay, so they are symbolically representing the shadow aspects of self, old patterns, intrusive thoughts, insecurities, egoic fears, basically all the internal obstacles that sabotage spiritual growth. They are coming into the field of higher consciousness, Joseph's house, and are about to be tested. Okay, so he tells them, yeah, spies, right? This is just symbolic of those old habits, intrusive thoughts. Their old consciousness being scanned and revealed. Benjamin, the youngest, represents pure consciousness, the sacred part of the soul that has remained untouched by guilt, anger, jealousy, or shadow impulses, right? Because our younger self, what happens? Before we're bombarded by the world and by our parents and all of these indoctrinations and all these things, you have your original, basically, soul. You're closest to the divine at that point. You haven't been influenced by everybody. Joseph sets up a test. He keeps them for 3 days. Once again, we see the 3 days. And this 3-day period is a symbolic death of old patterns, fasting, the fasting that has to happen in those 3 days so the oil can rise back up so we can go from winter to summer. A fasting, a purification cycle, forcing the ego and shadow to confront themselves. So Simon equals representing hearing awareness, the part of the self that reacts and notices shadow impulses. Levi represents action, transformation, and purification. Judah represents the heart, courage, willingness to sacrifice ego for higher purpose. Joseph's silver cup is placed in Benjamin's sack. Okay, Genesis 44, 2 through 12. This is the vessel of spiritual energy, the sacred oil, the pure essence of consciousness. Finding it in Benjamin's sack is a test of integrity. Will the pure self remain protected and uncorrupted, or will it be endangered by egoic attachments? When the brothers are accused of theft, they undergo a shadow confession. Okay, so this is the part of the story where the ego is confronted, the part of consciousness that has been clinging to guilt, fear, and attachment. They must admit to everything, right? You have to face yourself in all these things. Doesn't mean you're a terrible person, right? Just face it and understand that you have a shadow side and a light side. Okay, so release old impulses in order for Benjamin, the pure consciousness, to remain unharmed. The story here emphasizes the ego, Judah, can negotiate and sacrifice itself to protect the innocence and intuitive core of the self, Benjamin, right? Because he tells him, he's literally like, well, real quick, I want to go over this. In chapter 41, verse 54, and the 7 years of the dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said, and the dearth was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread, which is the oil, seed, truth, divine. Okay, so basically where we just were, Judah is like, I'll sacrifice myself. How about I go instead of Benjamin? Okay, and then you have the dad, he's like, Jacob, he's like, no, I can't lose another son, right? This is This is symbolic of like being scared to almost enter the dark night of the soul phase, to go through that shadow work. And this shows the integration of shadow and higher self, where the ego no longer dominates but serves the divine essence within. Okay, then we move on, and Joseph then reveals himself, right? Because they didn't remember that it was him. And Genesis 45, 1 through 15. And this is the accumulation. The shadow, the ego, the insecurities, and old patterns are reconciled, and the pure self is nurtured and elevated. Okay, so when Joseph sees Benjamin, he starts to weep, it says. And Joseph weeping on Benjamin equals the higher self reconnecting with the untouched pure consciousness inside of you, right? When you remember who we are, who you are, that we are all one, when you have that ego death, that is going, the emotions are going to overcome you. You're going to weep. You're going to, all of that's going to feel the same way as how he's feeling. Okay, so eating together equals the integration of spiritual nourishment, sacred oil, and the life force into the higher mind. Once again, the silver cup equals spiritual vessel, your energy refined and restored. 3-day cycles is the preparation, purification, and alignment of the shadow with the higher purpose. Okay, yeah, this is the, so Judah, just to take it back a little bit, because I skipped a little bit. Judah, right, when he steps up and offers himself in the place of Benjamin, this is egoic courage, the heart's willingness to surrender old patterns. Judah equals the heart, courage, conscious will. Benjamin, once again, pure consciousness. The act represents the ultimate alignment of shadow and higher self, where ego supports divine purpose instead of obstructing it, right? There is no true getting rid of the ego, but when we can work on our right side brain, the spiritual side, it can work for our left brain, and our left brain starts working for the divine instead of our own egoic, right? What can I do for me? We start thinking about what can I do for the collective? What can I do for everyone? We no longer think from a me, I perspective. When Joseph tells his brother to bring all their families and flocks into Egypt, the lower mind is being called to integrate the higher self. Genesis 46, 31 through 34. My brothers and my family's households were in the land of Canaan, right? Lower desires. The men and shepherds for their businesses is to feed cattle. So he says that was their job before, was to feed cattle, which is lower minds. They will come into Goshen, the place drawing near to God. It means that. The field of spiritual nourishment, where consciousness begins to feed on divine insight rather than lower instinct. Joseph nourished his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread, right? The oil, according to the families. According to their families. The famine was very severe. People were fainting. They cried out for bread, right? More bread, more oil. Joseph shows the true nourishment comes from integrating higher insight into lower patterns. When they brought their cattle to Joseph, this symbolizes surrendering the ego, lower impulses, and material attachments to receive spiritual guidance. Joseph sets up the system so that they can survive the 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. This is preparing consciousness during abundance, conserving during scarcity, purifying during cycles of challenge. The 7 years represent 7 chakras, 7 openings of energy, the alignment of inner temple and flow of consciousness. Chapter 48, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as spiritual inheritance. This is symbolic of generational transmission of consciousness, the alignment of higher self into the personality, blessing the channels of spiritual energy. In chapter 49, Jacob calls all his sons together, right? So now we're about to get into where Jacob dies, and then also Joseph dies as well. So he says, gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Gather yourselves and hear, O sons of Jacob. Okay, so this is the prophetic vision of consciousness, the final instructions for integration. The 12 sons represent the 12 zodiac signs, the archetypes of human consciousness. If you go to where he's about to talk to them, he gives descriptions of each one of the sons and what their duties are. And you can see how it's talking about the zodiac signs, right? For instance, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion, and as a old lion, who shall rouse him, right? This is Leo. Another example is Zebulun shall dwell at the havens of ships, his border unto Zidon. It could either be, right, because Zidon literally means fishing place of capture. Issachar is carrying burden. So, and it even says, heaven of ships and its borders shall be unto. So we're talking about water here. So this is either about Pisces or Aquarius. I'm not quite sure on which exactly one. I think all of them are. It gets a bit confusing, but it's describing literally the 12 sons. Then you start seeing it talk about the bow and the archer. Sagittarius, it says, Dan shall be a serpent, right? Scorpio. You see it's literally in there. It's all through the Bible, astrology. So don't let people try to tell you, and even look up the quotes that people are talking about, because a lot of the times it's talking about worshiping just the astrology, right? But we're not doing that. We're literally looking at the divine's work and understanding it, not worshiping or only just looking at that and never going within. Jacob's words are instructions for awakening, the accumulation of the inner journey of Genesis, integration, discernment, courage, humility, alignment with divine purpose. Jacob dies at 147 years, symbolizing the full cycle of spiritual maturation. They mourn for 40 days, a complete spiritual purification. They have 7 days of mourning, right? Opening the 7 chakras. They come to the threshing floor of Atad beyond Jordan, which Jordan is the spinal cord, Jordan River. So it says they go beyond the spinal, right? We're getting into the higher mind. The flow of Kundalini energy where consciousness is purified and transformed. Joseph ensures that the process of inheritance and blessing are honored, preserving the spiritual seed. Joseph lives to 110 years, representing the full spiritual realization and complete integration. He embalms his father, preserving the physical symbol of higher consciousness. Jacob is laid in a coffin in Egypt until the promise of returning to the ancestral land is fulfilled. This represents the continuity of consciousness across cycles, preservation of divine wisdom, and the promise of spiritual inheritance. Genesis ends with the full journey of consciousness. Jacob/Israel is the awakening soul. That's why he gets his name changed to Israel. Isis, Ra, El means God. Ra is the left brain, Isis being the right brain. Divine feminine, divine masculine. Combining the two into that one divine Christ consciousness mind. Okay, so Joseph, the higher self, Christ mind, divine illumination. Egypt, lower mind, material attachment, shadow work. Benjamin, pure untouched consciousness. The 12 sons, the 12 zodiacs, also the 12 cranial nerves that surround the brain, right? Okay, from early trial, shadow work, temptations, and deception to full illumination, blessings, and integration. Genesis is a complete esoteric map of spiritual evolution. Okay, so the final chapters teach. The beginning chapters we talked about in the other episodes are talking about when we go through each thing. When we go through Adam and Eve and the serpent, giving into the temptation, the left conquering the right, the spirit side. Same thing happens with Cain and Abel. Left conquers the right side. Abram and Lot, left conquers the right side again. Then we have the part where King Sodom is like, bring me all the people and I'll give you all the material stuff. And then finally, Abram, before he gets his H, which H is the breath, the spirit, the divine within him, he's like, no, I want to experience and get to know the right side, right? So all of this is talking about that. And the final chapters are teaching preparation, surrender. When you think that you're fully awakening and you're going to have to go through that shadow work, this is what all this is talking about. Fast for 3 days. The same thing that the sun has to do with shadow work. Jesus dying and going in the cave for 3 days. The sun has to do its shadow work and then it comes back up. And, we can rise up and all of these things. It's all symbolic of the same stuff. Santa Claus, right? The oil comes from the claustrum in the brain. Claustrum. This is why if you're fasting for 3 days and you're a good boy, good girl, and you're refraining from sex and all these things, you'll get the presents, right? Down the chimney, Santa goes, gives you that oil, gives you the presents. The same thing happens when you can fast, when you can go into meditation and stay away from the cattle, right? The earthly desires, and seek the sheep, which sheep in the Bible is symbolic of the divine thoughts. Okay, so remember, everything is symbolic, teaching you to go within, teaching you the spiritual awakening journey that happens. And it's basically a guide, and it's beautifully written when you can read it this way. I hope I didn't miss some things. I have so much that I wrote in my Bible and in my book here. But I hope you get the point, really. It's not about every little detail, it's just about what it's saying, right? Learn who you truly are. Go within, go into meditation. Going into meditation is the number one thing, the only thing that you can do to receive these downloads, what I call downloads, and divine thoughts. And, you know, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you did, make sure to subscribe, give me some likes. We're moving on up there. I'm very thankful for everybody that does show me support, watches my, you know, channel, my videos, and just gives me that energy that they don't have to, you know. So yeah, thank you guys. Make sure you're following my TikTok, @AshleyEckley_. We're moving and grooving over there too. I'm excited for the next episode that's about to come out. It won't be a part of the series, but I am going to do it with my friend Derek, and we're going to just decode, and he brings such beautiful insight to the as above, so below, the astrology, and, you know, has been on a similar journey. So I'm excited for that episode. So stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe so you know when that comes out. And yeah, y'all have a great week.